Welcome to Executive Access, created for motivated professionals. This is your home for real talk with executives about their career journeys, leadership practices, successes, and learnings along the way. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, I am speaking with Captain Matthew Thomas, Commanding Officer of the USS Carl Vinson. Matt discusses the complexity of leading a city at sea and breaks down for us how he leads other senior leaders, how he's learned to be a situational leader for creating really great outcomes, and the priority he puts on creating the right culture on his ship to ensure both combat readiness and quality of life and service. I went into this conversation not knowing a lot about how the military works, and I left this conversation with a much deeper appreciation for the leadership challenges that Matt faces, as well as the incredible skills that he and others in the military develop through their service. And while some of the challenges are unique to the military, there were more connections than I realized to the way corporate leadership and corporations work. On behalf of all of us, me and you, we thank Captain Thomas for his service, and we thank his incredible crew of over 5,000 sailors. Let's dive in. Hi, welcome Captain Matt Thomas to the Executive Access Podcast. So excited to have you here.
It's good to be with you, Jamie. Good to see you again.
Thanks. You are the commanding officer of the USS Carl Vinson, the aircraft carrier. You are a graduate with the highest distinction from the U.S. Naval Academy. You had your bachelor's in mechanical engineering, which is something that my son is about to start pursuing as well. You also have a distinction master's at the U.S. Naval War College, and you got schooling at the Navy Nuclear Power School. It's a lot of school. You're a naval pilot with over 4,300 flight hours. You've completed over 500 carrier arrestments, which I had to look up that term, but I know what that means now, which is great. At sea, you were the commanding officer of the USS Portland, the executive officer of the USS Nimitz, and the commanding officer of the Sun Kings of VAW 116. And then ashore, you were an instructor pilot with the VAW 120 and the Joint Staff J3 and the Deputy Directorate of Nuclear Command and Control and Homeland Defense. You're highly decorated. I won't go through everything, but you have the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, 2 Meritorious Service Medals, 7 Strike Flight Air Medals, 5 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal, and various other unit citations and campaign ribbons. You were also the 2015 recipient of the Navy Marine Corps Association Leadership Award. Thank goodness for that award, because that is what qualified you to be here today on this podcast. But I don't, I don't usually spend so much time on an introduction, but I think it's incredibly warranted. And I just want to say thank you so much for your service. So, Captain Thomas, maybe or Matt, I'm just going to call you Matt. Matt, maybe you could just spend a few minutes describing what it's really like to be a commanding officer of an aircraft carrier, 5,000 or so sailors under your leadership.
Jamie, thanks for having me this morning. It's as you read through the bio with a lot of words, it's certainly been a long road to get here. I've been in the Navy now 27 years. And our aircraft carriers, that's very typical. It's almost it's the pinnacle of a long road in naval aviation, and then learning about the rest of our Navy to ultimately command one of these large warships. And like you said, it's 5,000 people when we have both our embarked air wing, so all of the squadrons that fly aboard. There's 8 different squadrons that come join the ship when we're out to sea. And then I have about 3,000 sailors of my own. So in aggregate, that becomes 5,000 sailors. And it's truly a city at sea. These aircraft carriers are over 1,000 feet long. They weigh nearly 100,000 tons. And I have everything to be a city at sea. I've got an airport where all the airplanes take off and land. I've got all of the administrative functions. I've got 2 nuclear reactors to provide the propulsion, to move the main engines, to provide electricity, to provide steam to launch those aircraft off the catapults. I've got maintenance facilities, you name it. I've got a media department. I've got a TV studio. And so I think to understand the scope of that, especially as, hey, what's it like to be a captain? I have I have 20 direct reports. So as far as organizational structure of the ship itself, those heads of department range from the administrative, human resources aspect to engineering to nuclear reactor to medical, dental, you name it. So it's a wide scope, and then I have, in addition, I have all these squadrons that come on board. I have other entities that come on board the ship that I work with and have to collaborate with on a daily basis, so that the carrier, when she is out at sea, her embarked air wing, which is all those aircraft, we go to sea with other destroyers and cruisers as part of a larger carrier strike group. So as big as an endeavor it is, I'm still a part of another piece of the puzzle, so to speak.
Excellent. Well, thank you for painting the picture for us around all of that. It is, I was joking with you as we were getting started today. We had a bit of an audio problem on my end, and I felt the stress kind of creeping up from the bottom of my stomach. And what kind of calmed me, made me laugh, is I'm like, this is not stress. Like Matt would not say that what I'm experiencing right now, a momentary hiccup in sound, is stress. So, well, that's great. And I want to dive into a lot of these things. We're going to talk about just how you lead across such a large, diverse team, how you are getting the best out of your leaders, and then even down to those 5,000 sailors. And also what I call sort of cross-team leadership, like all of the I'm going to call them all of the business partners that you have invited along your ship with you, and how you're coordinating with all of that. So we'll get to all of that in a few minutes. And with that background, I think it's going to give our listeners even more to kind of contemplate. I am interested, though, in what you're doing to grow personally and professionally these days. Give our listeners a little bit about you personally. I know you, for example, you're an avid runner, right? And you do that with your sons as well, which is very cool.
So, you got to maintain balance in life, and it can be a challenge, certainly at this level, leading so many sailors and being busy 18 hours a day. But I just have to be intentional about my time. That's probably the one precious resource that I have to be very mindful of. So, try to, as Kaylee, my wife, always says, I want to leave my time on the ship, leave my time in the Navy, whenever that comes, in good health, in both mental and physical health, with a strong marriage, and good relationship with my kids. So I try to be intentional about that each day, whether I work out, go running with my boys, read when I can, and then certainly spend that quality time with Kaylee as well.
I'm so glad you brought up Kaylee. I had the privilege of meeting her. We met on the soccer fields, all of us together. And man, she is a strong, amazing person, mother. She was a naval intelligence officer as well. Do I have that right? Or
she was
in naval intelligence. What an incredible person. And I can sort of see the backbone probably of a lot of what's going on for you. So wonderful. So I would love to start off with your personal story, though. What made you go into the military, and did you know right from the start of the Naval Academy that you were going to spend your entire career so far in the military?
So I grew up in Ohio, and no real military or naval service. My father had spent some time in the Air National Guard while he was in college, but no, enduring legacy of service in our family. But I was a kid in the 80s and watched movies and decided, wow, I'd really like to fly airplanes and land on aircraft carriers. And that was when I was in junior high. And that was what got me interested. I then had a family friend, I have an older sister, and one of her friends went to the Naval Academy. And so that's what then got me interested in going to the Naval Academy. And so, unlike my own kids who still don't know exactly what they want to do, I was very early on. I knew that I wanted to be a pilot and I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and was fortunate enough to be accepted and go there. And 4 years there, and then selected for pilot, went to flight school, I don't think I ever thought that I would stay as long as I did. You know, I think at one point in time, as you watch Top Gun and other movies like that, I saw the aircraft carrier gliding across the horizon with the sun behind it, and ultimately I thought, hey, that would be, if I stuck around in the Navy long enough, that would be really cool job to do. So here I am 27 years later, a kid still living out his childhood dream.
I love that. And Top Gun, by the way, was one of my favorite movies. Also, what was that, the early 90s or something? My favorite.
I think it was like 1986.
Was it 86?
So,
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
That's right. Maybe I'm trying to appear younger than I am, right? In terms of how I remember things. So wonderful. Well, you mentioned as you were describing, what's it like to lead an aircraft carrier and to command an aircraft carrier, just the different, the scope of everything involved. And I also knew just from looking at your background, talking to you, that you took on so many different commands, some of them vertical moves, some of them lateral moves. Was that an intentional way of developing your career, even laterally sometimes, to develop a breadth of experiences that prepared you for leading an aircraft carrier?
Yes. So, within the Navy, there's kind of, career paths, so to speak. Like in any profession, there's a golden path. And I largely followed a lot of that golden path, whether that's increasing vertically your scope of responsibilities. So for pilots, typically, once we complete flight school, we do our first operational tour for about 3 years. And then you leave that tour, and generally the Navy wants you to go back and be an instructor pilot and teach that new crop of pilots who are finishing their flight schooling to earn their qualifications. And then as you progress along, you become, that scope of responsibility increases. So I was the maintenance officer of a squadron. So at that point in time, about 100 sailors who did all of the day-to-day maintenance on our aircraft. And then as you, again, progress along further, screened to be the commanding officer of a squadron. So at that point in time, I had 4 aircraft, about 250 sailors. So it's that increasing responsibility like you talk about, but there's also some lateral moves that are part of our career progression. And those are, whether that's schooling, which, whether that's a vertical move or a lateral move, but, got my schooling at the Naval War College to expand and broaden my perspective. And then I also spent time in the Pentagon working on the larger chairman of the Joint Chiefs staff. That was definitely lateral, but very broadening in to see how the Navy fits into the larger Department of Defense structure, and how the Department of Defense works across all of the interagency, the National Security Council, et cetera. So definitely lots of a breadth of experience to help prepare me and other naval officers as we increase our leadership and scope of responsibilities.
I find that fascinating because there was at one point in my career, it was probably mid-career, and I just had my job on the next thing up. I was leading a pretty broad sales team, and I wanted to take the next level up. And I had a leader come to me and ask me to take what was a lateral move, and it was even stepping out of the direct sales team and working across an operating model team, working with the product teams, a different thing in a tech scenario. And I was sort of like, why do I have to do this, right? But what I learned in terms of cross-team leadership, in terms of understanding the perspective of other parts of the business, when I did come back, and I did eventually get that job, I'm proud to say, that bigger job,
Yeah.
I was 10 times better than I would have been if I just would have taken that vertical path. That J3 job sounds kind of similar as the way you're describing it.
Yeah, it was. That was not. It was a good time for us, family-wise, in DC. We enjoyed living there. The job itself was not. It was like, as you described, it was like, is that really the job I want to do? But I learned so much that I still use today, and it really helped me understand what our senior leaders are thinking about, and really the senior leaders at the highest level. So it helps me frame, what we do on the ship and how I communicate up to, my boss and my boss's boss to help them in their jobs.
That's excellent. Thanks for that communication skills. So just for those listening that you're kind of on this precipice, like wondering if you should take this kind of crazy perspective building role, jump in is my advice.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. I'm curious about as a senior leader, so you have 20 direct reports. You maybe have done the jobs or parts of the jobs of some of the people in your team, not all. You certainly can't be an expert all the way down across everything. Can you talk a little bit about how you lead? I was going to ask you how you lead such a diverse team, but maybe starting with leaders of leaders first, right? How do you think about leading very senior, diverse set of leaders, but making sure there's some kind of connective tissue there?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges, certainly on a ship of this size with this many, kind of individual departments, getting them all talking together. And they all come from very different backgrounds. That group of 20, I've got a lifelong nuclear operator who also drives ships. I've got doctors, dentists. I've got, professionals who have done aviation maintenance all of their career.
Mm.
So it is interesting trying to bring this very diverse group together. So I think the benefit a little bit is they have done this a long time. I mean, they are all have been been in the Navy upwards, approaching 20 years themselves. So they have a breadth of experience. And it's, for me, getting them together, I kind of, I don't meet with all 20 of them every day. The benefit, again, the structure that we have on the ships is I'm the commanding officer, and then I have an executive officer. So I'm like I'm the CEO, and I have a COO who's my executive officer, and then I have a command master chief. We collectively form what's called the triad. My command master chief is my senior enlisted advisor for a lot of those sailors. So I meet with my core, the three of us, the triad, meet every day. And then I meet with about a half a dozen of my major department heads on a daily basis, just to kind of, a status check on what is going on. Those are usually the major things. How's the nuclear plant operating? How's everything on the flight deck? What's our operational schedule look like? And that's also helps, one, keep me informed, but also ensure alignment with those major department heads. And then about once a week, I get together with everybody, all 20 of them, and then oftentimes their senior deputies as well, so they can pass information amongst themselves and to me, and then I can provide that big picture guidance to all of them.
Oh, that's great. So I call that in my world the rhythm of the business. You just described the rhythm of how you run your business, which is great. How important is it for the 20 of them to be in sync with each other or to be in the know about what's going on across them?
Oh, it's of immense importance for them to all be aligned. As I tell newly reporting heads of department, anything affects everything on board an aircraft carrier. And they kind of sometimes give a quizzical look, because sometimes, they might think, I'm just the head medical doctor, my impact or, some decision here may not have that big of an impact, but it really does. And so it's ensuring that they all talk so that there's, not to say that there's not surprises, but, they know what the schedule is, and they can then just have that alignment. It's like I said, anything affects everything on board an aircraft carrier. It's very dynamic, and things move at a very quick pace. So being in the know about what is the most current plan is of paramount importance.
I'm going to steal that. Anything affects everything, because the way I talk about that very thing is we need to have one operating model. That is so boring. Yours is better. Anything affects everything. And I think where I see, I actually don't see people doing this well, like really, really well, which to me, it basically says know your function really, really well. Drive your function, be the expert in your function, but you have to look left and right as well and understand where it impacts everybody else. At one point I was, coaching a startup and there was amazing work happening across all the teams, but the connective tissue really wasn't there. And so they weren't iterating and innovating as quickly as they needed to kind of get to the same end place. So anything affects everything. I'm stealing that. Thank you. Appreciate that.
No, that's good. And like you said, I encourage those HODs, like they've got to look left and look right. Like you have said, they got to look up, and they also need to look down as well. They got to look in a whole lot of directions because things move very fast, and they need to keep in tune with what's going on.
So along the lines of, things moving fast, right? And not to say that everything that happens is a, stressful situation, but it can be. I mean, the impact of what you do, the reason why you all exist, I would love to talk for a few minutes about decision-making under pressure, right? I imagine that there are some high stakes, high pressure situations that you deal with. And I'm curious about your approach to decision-making, how you think about that, and especially with all these leaders around you.
Sure. Yeah, it can, those, I guess, time-critical, stressful decisions, they can come in all matter of forms. I think my typical leadership style, to go in the larger leadership style sense, leadership for me is very situational, and there's a lot of context there. So depending on who it is and what it is, I vary that leadership style. But in crisis, when things are happening fast, I tend to be a bit more collaborative when I can, but when it's crisis, ultimately that decision comes down to, my decision. So, I've got to take those inputs if I can. Again, I'm not the subject matter expert on everything that's out there. So I try to gather as much input as I can. One, to accurately understand the situation. There's the term the fog of war, and the fog of war is real, and sometimes initial reports are not always accurate.
I see.
So I've got to weigh that, as individuals are looking for decisions to be made. I got to balance the fact of, hey, that initial report may not have been entirely accurate. And so, getting the information from multiple sources, and then if I have the time, bringing in, one of my subject matter experts, oftentimes looking for a recommendation. As I tell, a lot of times I tell all of my leaders, whether that's a officer on the bridge, whether that's, someone in the propulsion plant, as you come to me with a problem, as you come to me with a crisis, also, my expectation is you come to me with a solution, or a couple of solutions, and here's my recommendation. That just helps make sure that I get their buy-in. They own the problem as well, and are not just handing me a problem with no way out.
That's a great bit of advice. I don't always see that in my world, of course, more corporate world, but I don't always see that. I hear a lot about problems, and it's like, okay, but what? And I also like your idea of, okay, there's 3 things we can do, and don't stop there. And here's the one that I recommend, right? You're giving me options, and you're giving me your recommendation. So, and tying that to ownership. I want to go back to sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
I was going to say the other thing that I always, at the practical level, when, whether that's one of my heads of department or other individuals come to me, with an issue, the other framework I kind of use is, hey, when you come to me, tell me what, tell me so what, and then tell me now what. And that kind of helps key them to what I'm looking for to get to a decision.
What, so what, and now what? I love that.
And now what?
And now what? And to do that as succinctly as possible, especially in these like high stress environments, right?
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great framework that will help people communicate all kinds of different things to all kinds of different audiences. So what could be in this situation for this particular problem? So what could be for the audience you're talking to, and so on. So thank you. I wanted to go back to what you said about situational leadership, because I usually ask the question, what's your leadership philosophy? But if I understand really where you're going, it's more about situational leadership. Is that right?
Exactly. Yes.
So can you say more?
So
Because I am interested in your leadership philosophy. So tell me what you call it, and what are some of the guiding principles that you have?
yeah. So I've studied leadership certainly all throughout my career, and there's all varying forms. There's the transformational leader. There's the transactional leader. There's the laissez-faire leader. There's the more autocratic leader. And what I found throughout my career, probably earlier on, I probably more stuck with one leadership style. But as the scope changed, as my experience changed, I realized that I needed to utilize more than one of those leadership styles. And whether that's, again, the situation that we're in, like there's sometimes that, it is, a democratic approach is more applicable. Other times it's got to be a very much more quick decision, and for efficiency and timeliness, it's a more autocratic leadership style. And it's also dependent on, the individuals that I'm trying to lead. Everybody's different. Individuals respond differently to different leadership styles. And so learning and working with them and figuring out, hey, how can I best lead this person, or how can I best lead that group, has kind of, I would say, forced me, but made me realize the importance of utilizing different leadership styles across as I lead 5,000 sailors on board the ship.
I love that. So it's about being flexible. And I'm hearing you say what the situation calls for might demand it, or definitely what is, I like to say, how can I get the best out of this person or this group, right? And so I can't change them, so I have to flex to know what that.
And I was just going to say, I've seen leaders, throughout my time who have been maybe a bit inflexible in their leadership style, and to their detriment. They couldn't lead as effectively otherwise because they had one style and didn't want to, change themselves to fit the needs of what the group that they were leading.
Sometimes when I coach senior leaders and CEOs, and I start to see that a little bit, I'll ask a question. I'll say, so do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective? Because you can't be both in the situation, right? Because I'm not saying what you want to do or say is wrong, but do you want to be effective in the outcome you're trying to drive? I think that's great. That's great. So you mentioned those guests that you have on board often, or that, what I call cross-team leadership. How do you think about engaging? Because, if I understand the situation, you're accountable for everything, of course, that happens on the ship. And at the same time, you're not directly accountable for all of the mission, parts of the mission that you might be affecting, with people on board or whatnot. How do you kind of balance and lead cross-team with some of those other agencies or groups that are coming on? I'm not sure if I'm asking that effectively, but I think you can kind of get where I'm going.
No, I see where you're going with that. That can be a challenge. And I'd say first off, when you get any group of senior executives together, relationships matter, and that is paramount. Building that trust amongst that group, because everybody, we all have the same mission, but we approach it differently, and we all have a bit different piece of that pie. And so, when I came in to be the captain of the ship, I met with each of those, essentially they're sort of my peers. We're peers in the sense of what we do across the strike group. And so I sat down, just, kind of build that relationship with them, outlined the things that were my concerns. As you say, I am ultimately responsible for what happens on the ship. And so one of the things I always talk to them about, and we can talk, have good risk discussions later on. But one of the things I always tell them is, hey, all of, as you're doing your operations, you're flying your aircraft, you're maneuvering your ships, you're accepting some level of risk in your operations. And what I always tell them is, hey, realize like that risk ultimately is I'm the one who's ultimately carrying that risk for this ship and the sailors on board. And I think it's good for them to kind of, and it's good for us as a group for all of us to understand that. But I, have great relationships with them. I understand their missions. They understand my missions. And, there's sometimes a bit of compromise in there about what we need to do and how we need to execute it.
I really like that because the relationship part, number one, there's two things, but the relationship part, taking the time to invest in that when we're really busy doesn't always come super naturally. But I don't know about you, but I can't think of a time in my career where every once in a while I didn't have to leverage one of those relationships to say, oops, really sorry, I messed up. Can you help me out here?
Exactly,
and then,
yeah.
I like this idea of let's just throw on the table some things that are concerning us and some risks or some things that may happen, because it's always easier to talk about those things up front when they haven't happened than have to deal with the after effects with all the emotion and things that happen like after the fact. And I find that if you can lay all those things out on the table and talk about expectations of how we're all going to behave, I think things go a lot smoother. So I like how you frame that.
Yep. No. Yeah. It's what we do on the ship. In a lot of cases, lives are at stake, and making sure that we're all in alignment. We all have our own concerns, whether that's my concerns, whether that's the Air Wing commander's concerns. We've got that all out in the open, and we continue to talk, daily, weekly, to make sure that those things change. Right, my concerns change, the other senior leaders' concerns change, and so that we are all in alignment as well.
Yeah, you didn't really say this explicitly, but I would imagine that the way you and the other senior leaders are modeling that behavior of relationship development and partnership is modeling that for the rest of your teams as it trickles down throughout the organization as well, which I think is, of utmost importance, because we've all seen scenarios where there are just two groups that aren't working well together. And you're like, why is this happening? And you look right up to the top and you can often see why. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, we see that even in the Navy at times, where those senior leaders are they're not in alignment. Maybe and maybe sometimes not working. I would say working against each other, but not working well, and it just it is very toxic culturally, and ultimately that unit or that group of units is not effective.
That's right. And it leads me to wanting to ask you about how you lead such a large, diverse team. And here I'm talking about not just the leaders on your team, but down to every enlisted, sailor that you have. How do you manage and motivate such a diverse crew? Maybe, I mean, there's so many questions in here, from how you keep everybody aligned to that mission, because if you can keep everybody aligned up here, the rest sort of falls into place, to how you think about morale. It's culture, right? I'm curious about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, leading at scale, leading 5,000 sailors, it's a challenge, and that's been a challenging transition for me. I very much like being down on what we call the deck plates, where our sailors are at, seeing what they're doing and interacting with them. But not possible to do that, and not possible to know every sailor when there's 5,000 of them. So, when I do have the opportunity to do that, I don't take that for granted. I realize that sometimes those personal interactions with an individual sailor that might be the only time in my time on board the ship or that sailor's time on board the ship that, hey, they're going to get a chance to talk with me and I'm going to get a chance to talk with them. So I very much relish those personal times where I, one-on-one or one on a very small group with a number of sailors. But to lead, kind of to lead all 5,000 of them, I have a number of means to address them. When sailors first come on board the ship, we do indoctrination, and it's about 3 or 4 days. They learn about the ship. They learn about all the services on the ship, things like that. And so I take about 30 minutes of my time and talk with those newly arriving sailors. Some of them are fresh out of boot camp. It's their first time on a ship. Some of them have been in the Navy for 15 years. But I take that opportunity. Certainly, there's times where we'll get the entire 5,000 people together in the hangar bay, and I'll take the opportunity. A lot of times those are in conjunction with some sort of recognition, whether a batch of sailors got promoted or we're recognizing and awarding sailors for performance. So I take that time to talk with everybody who's there. And then daily, oftentimes when we're underway, one of the kind of award recognition things that we do is I recognize a sailor of the day. And they are nominated by their department. That sailor comes up to the bridge, sits, that's where we drive the ship from. That sailor comes up there, sits in the captain's chair, my chair, and we chit chat for about 30 minutes, and, give them some, benefits, front of the line for, the chow line, or front of the line to go to the ship store to get, sodas or chips or whatever. And then at the end of that, I will often get on what's called the 1MC. That's our general announcing system on the ship. And I'll recognize that sailor over the 1MC, tell the crew good things and why that sailor was nominated. And then I'll talk about, hey, what's going on the ship? What are we doing? Just so that the crew stays engaged about what the ship is doing day in and day out. So lots of different means and mechanisms to ensure that I can interact with the crew on a daily basis.
Amazing. So just recounting a couple of things that really I heard you say. So, your recognition that the time you spend, even if it's a very brief comment to one sailor, maybe the only time you ever engage, I think that's so impactful, because as senior leaders, we often forget the impact that we have on people. We may see ourselves, I might say, oh, I'm just Jamie, whatever, I'm just Jamie. But to others, the impact you have, and so the way you show up in small ways and big ways really matters. I mean, there's a bit of a weight to that and a bit of a, just a accountability to that. But I think I did have one, after I left Microsoft after nearly 20 years, this one woman, Vanessa, came up to me and she said, you encouraged me once, and never forget the power of one encouraging word. Now, I didn't remember that word. I didn't remember that incident, but it was a reminder like, oh yeah. And so anyway, I just think there's some leaders that need to hear that. Maybe you're running around the office hairy, just take a moment. And then the rewards and recognition. I love that you do that, because as much as I cared about people through my career, I just had to be reminded to slow down and celebrate a little bit. So I was glad that I had people around me that would remind me. But then even your 30 minutes with the team of saying, hey, here's the behaviors I want to see here. That's not probably the words you use, but that's essentially, this is how we do it, on the USS Carl Vinson, I think sets the tone.
Yeah. That command in-dock period is, like I said, I take that 30 minutes, part of it is, as I talk with them, like, hey, this is my opportunity to get to know you a little bit. I think it's important for you to get to know me a little bit. Hey, who am I ultimately working for? And then what's important to me? I think, on a daily basis for our sailors, as I tell them this, I want to make sure that they still understand their purpose. They do incredibly difficult jobs across the ship, long hours for days, weeks, sometimes months on end. And it can be, on a ship that big, you can sometimes, those sailors can lose a little bit of the big picture. They're standing watch in our engineering spaces, and they do that, 8-10 hours a day, or they're preparing food in our galleys. And they then forget, like, hey, what's this larger thing that the aircraft carrier does, and why are we launching airplanes, and coming back, or why are we sailing here? So that's one of those things, on the daily basis when I'm on our general announcing system, that I kind of explain, hey, this is what the ship is doing, and this is why you matter. Everybody, everybody matters on the ship. If the Navy didn't need 5,000 sailors on board the ship, there wouldn't be 5,000 sailors on board the ship. Any business would do it for less, right? So making sure that they understand their purpose and how they fit into the ship's overall mission.
It sounds like you do your own version of what, so what, now what with the entire organization. If you think about it, right, that's really what you're doing to communicate to everybody and making sure everybody feels tied in. Fantastic. What about balance, or I know in the corporate world, wellness and balance is a really big thing. Certainly talked about and practiced more today than when I started my career years ago. Is that also a trend or something that you think about in your organization?
It is. As I tell my sailors, even during that command in dock, the two things that I think about every day, okay, are one, combat readiness, right? That's why we exist. And then I also think about their quality of life and their quality of service. And whether, for a sailor, if they're going to stay in the Navy for 4 years, or they're going to stay in the Navy for 30 years, I want to make sure that, they have a good experience while they're in the Navy, and they have a good, their day-to-day quality of life is good. Part of that is, first and foremost, and that's culture. And that's the culture of respect that those sailors have amongst each other, with their leadership, or leaders to the sailors that they work with. The ship is a melting pot. We got sailors from 50 states, some other countries, from, you pick your state, some of them grew up in the big city in New York. Some of them grew up in a very small town in the middle of Arkansas, and blending all of those values together so that everybody can get along. That's the first and foremost about, a good quality of life. And then, the wellness piece of that, having the opportunity, we work very much on our schedule and ensuring what we call circadian rhythm, so that our routines throughout the day, throughout the night, because it's, a ship is operating 24 hours a day, but making sure that everybody is afforded a good schedule so that they can get, a good period of uninterrupted sleep. There's not drills going on. There's not, announcements over the 1MC, things that would interrupt their sleep. We have gyms on board the ship. All right. Making sure that those, they can, keep themselves physically fit, others to de-stress, usually, so there's plenty of gyms aboard the ship. We have, a library, Liberty space that was outfitted by the USO, just kind of a home away from home. It's got couches and chairs and kind of a fake fireplace, and it doesn't look like anything on a ship, right? But it's just a place where they can go, quiet space, kind of detached from there. We have religious services that happen throughout the week. And then even, on the mental health side, I've got psychologists and I have social workers who, sailors who need somebody to talk to, have somebody to talk to as they work through either personal problems, workplace problems back at home, so that they have the physical and mental wellness while they serve out at sea.
I'm thrilled to hear that. That's amazing. And, what also strikes me is this is probably fascinating for you of all the things you say. Like, what strikes me as a relatively outsider to your world, right? You know, you started off describing what it's like to be the commanding officer of an aircraft carrier and all the complexity that it entails and the 20 direct reports. And then you netted it out as simply as possible to two key priorities. We're going to be combat ready. We're going to create quality of life and service for our team. And I think my guess is that is what keeps things straight for you and is one of the reasons why your leadership is so strong. You're able to simplify all the stuff going around you. That's how I'm taking this. I'm like, that made perfect sense to me, even though the details of that are incredibly complex. So
yeah, I think it's I hope that it keeps things simple, and for every each one of those departments and those groups as they interact and collaborate, that keeps it first and foremost about what's important. All 20 of those departments have some piece of being combat ready, and it means different things in each of those departments. So that's important, but then it's kind of that balance again of the quality of life, quality of service for our sailors, because we can talk about aircraft and we can talk about ships and we can talk about weapon systems and missiles, all right, and those make our Navy very capable, but probably even more so than that are the sailors that fly those airplanes, that fix those airplanes, that do the maintenance on board the ship. They are the true advantage that our Navy has amongst our competitors.
I just really geek out on this stuff because there's no way that you personally can make sure that every 5,000 of those 5,000 is doing what they need to do. But if you can provide them with the principle, be in whatever small piece of the pie you have, be combat ready, make sure that your quality of life and service is high. And if it's not in either one of those things, fix it or bringing it up. Like, that's how you get the outcome. So anyway, Sorry, I get excited about this stuff. But it does remind me, I wanted to ask you about one more, I'm going to be respectful of your time, but there's one more major thing I'm interested in, and it's around mentorship and development, right? How do you identify, mentor, and develop future leaders?
Sure. So I've certainly been the beneficiary of a lot of mentorship and guidance throughout my career. And I still get that opportunity now. And so, there's different ways to mentor, whether that's my 20 direct reports or the other officers and chiefs on board. Some of that is, we do kind of annual performance evaluations. And so certainly a great opportunity as those reports come up to debrief the individuals and talk about, hey, this is what your performance was. This is how I evaluate you. And then this is kind of, where I see you going in the future. These are some things you can improve upon. This is kind of where I see that your track is. We do counseling sessions about, every 6 months that lead into that. But then there's also certainly the one-on-one, I would say unscheduled, but just, kind of situationally happens where you talk with an individual about kind of how their performance is going. And certainly, I guess the other aspect that I have is, I've got a lot of, in my position now as the captain of the ship, a lot of the air crew that are on board, like those are the future, they're the future leaders of the Navy. And one of those, pilots in one of those squadrons is the next captain, or in a few years, the next captain of USS Carl Vinson. And so, identifying them, and explaining, hey, what it is to be the captain, how I've gotten here, the paths and the steps that I've had to take. I have those conversations probably every week with different individuals who are, curious and kind of want to know what the different paths and options are for them as they go throughout their Navy career.
Excellent. I wanted to, you've given me even today in our previous conversation, so much of a better appreciation for how, how folks in the military really grow, the kind of things that they're learning. And I just want to make sure that, if there's anybody like me who really didn't experience the military, wasn't really around it, that they understand that when you come out of military training, you have phenomenal skills. And so there might be people like you that decide to pursue most of their career in the military. And there might be some that come out into, the private area, into the corporate world. I'll just tell one quick story. There was this gentleman, Russell Cood. He was a first line leader when I worked with him on leadership development at Microsoft. And I just kept saying to him, how do you know how to do this stuff? Your critical thinking is through the roof. And he always kept saying to me, I learned that through my military service. He was a pilot in the Navy as well. Now he is the CEO of a security technology organization. And so I hope that our listeners are really thinking about that when you see a former military background resume come across your desk, understanding that they're going through tremendous training and tremendous leadership skills that could be really great for your organization.
Yeah, no, they, our junior officers and senior enlisted, and even our junior enlisted, as they have learned a lot in their service, leadership. And, sometimes I think, as they transition and enter the corporate world, sometimes, it's on us. We don't necessarily always articulate very well or translate it over to the corporate world about what we do. And there's so many similarities. They're fantastic. And I think the other thing for, a lot of transitioning service members is they're incredibly flexible. They're incredibly adaptable. In most cases, they are super eager and motivated. And I would say take a chance on them because they won't let you down. They will learn and work hard for you and be amazing.
I believe that, and I've seen that. Well, as we move to a close, Matt, are there any books that you love, leadership books or things that you can share real quick with the audience?
Yeah, there's a couple. I thought of 3 books that were really impactful to me. And the first one is The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. It's just, trust is what makes, us successful and effective. And as a leader, I've got to be able to trust those who work for me. But on the flip side, those who work for me have to trust me. And, on a larger sense, those moms and dads who send their sons or daughters to the ship to join the Navy, they've got to trust me that I'm going to take care of their son or daughter and bring them home safely. So super impactful book. I read that book as I was taking command of Carl Vinson, and just I reflect on that daily. The second book is Team of Teams by Lieutenant General Stan McChrystal. Yeah, great book. I mean, I work in and amongst a team of teams all the time. I've got my own teams on board the ship. I work with other teams as the other kind of warfare commanders that I talked about, the Air Wing Commander, the Destroyer Squadron Commodore, always working in and amongst teams. And then the last one that I thought of is the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. He's got a whole series of those books. And I just thought those are very good, practical, day-to-day, kind of leadership 101 books. I read a few of those in years past and just really helped, when I'm, what I call retail leadership, when I'm down there with sailors one-on-one, leading them, and it was very impactful as well.
Excellent. Thank you for those. The first 2 I've read, but years and years ago, and now I'm sort of inspired to go back and see what I might take out of them new now. And the third one I'm looking forward to trying. So thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you. So I ask all of my guests one final question. If you could wrap by giving us just one piece of advice about leadership, what would that be?
I would say, continue to learn, continue to grow, being adaptable and being flexible as a leader, especially as you grow in your roles and responsibilities is paramount. Situations change, groups change, environments change, and to be successful as a leader, you have to be able to adapt to that. Use all the tools and experience that you have to make my ship successful or your organization successful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, Matt, I know I'm going to speak on behalf of all the executive access leaders. Thank you for your service. And please express that to your sailors as well. Thank you so much for their service. We know you guys keep us safe and all the great work you're doing. So thank you so much for being here today as well.
It's good to be here. Thanks, Jamie.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Join us every Tuesday for insider access to executive leadership.